Hello there, and welcome to another episode of the Mind of James podcast. Today, we're going to talk about the high rates of depression, anxiety, and mental health issues that we're starting to see in today's modern world, especially amongst the younger and younger generations. And it's rising at an abnormal rate. It's very kind of alarming. And hopefully, by the end of this segment, you'll understand a little bit better why it is that you or someone that you know could be depressed, because it's not so clear usually the reason for why someone is depressed, especially with what's happening nowadays. There isn't necessarily a clear, identifiable reason for why you might be depressed, and yet you feel depression. Same thing with anxiety. And the way we can get started on that is by going back to an old idea, at least relatively old, which really, it all started with Nietzsche. Nietzsche had a lot to say about the modern psyche. In some circles, he is considered a great psychologist, if you will, before modern psychology really took off. And so the idea with Nietzsche, what he's known for, is that he announced the death of God, if you will. And this has a lot of meanings, and people interpret it in many different ways. Now, what Nietzsche said when we killed God had nothing to do with whether he believed that God existed or didn't exist. The main thing that he was trying to express, at least in my opinion, was that the death of God, which is literally something that we have effectuated essentially by stopping the belief and stopping the faith that we used to have, is what plunged us into this world of chaos and darkness and depression. So in Nietzsche's time, atheism and that sort of trend started, and more people were sort of, I guess, leaving the religious sort of ideology. And the problem that comes along with not having some kind of structure or, objective, some kind of objective morality to guide you through life, to answer the existential questions that we all have to deal with at one point or another. If you get rid of that structure, that system, then you are free, yes, but people really don't like freedom, because if you think about being free to think or choose to believe in one purpose or one morality over another without actually understanding the root of purpose and morality, then it's very scary. So people do away with religion, and then chaos ensues. And this is something that he predicted, and he was right. Hundreds of millions of people died in the following century after he died, precisely because people got rid of religion. Now, here's the thing. I'm not making a case for religion. What I'm making a case for is something very similar but different at the same time. It's something called religiosity. Religiosity is a need that we all have. It's as essential to the human person as breathing. Whether you believe in a god or you're an atheist or the pantheist, whatever sort of ideology that you subscribe to, it really ties all of those ideologies or lack thereof together. And it's this need to have community. It's the need to be transcendental. It's the need to nurture what it is that makes us human. That is what I describe as religiosity, which isn't the same as religion. Religion is the organized structure that human beings come together and create so as to fulfill the need for religiosity. It's how they enact it, right? Give you an example. It's no coincidence that in Christianity we use, in the churches, a lot of the times you have myrrh, right, or incense, and they usually fill the entire church with this incense, and we drink wine as well. Well, the reason for that is because it would get you high, literally. And what happens when you take like certain drugs or alcohols, or you do certain rituals? Well, you get some kind of sensation, like you transcend this world, right? And that's why people do drugs. They sort of enter this paradigm or dimension that goes beyond ours here, you know. And what kind of reality do we live in right now, you know, on this plane of reality? Well, it seems like it's an absurd reality, right? What is the purpose of it? We don't know. We can't come up with one that would be satisfying because of something called infinite regression. Now, I can get into that in a little bit, but you can start to see just with that small example how the whole religion thing is just a structure that people create so as to fulfill this religiosity need for human beings. So what happens when you get rid of religion? Well, you get rid of the system through which, you know, you would have had access to the structures that allow you to fulfill your religiosity. But that doesn't mean that you stop trying to fulfill your religiosity, which means that people go and they create religions out of other things. That's why people think that there's a sort of misconception when it comes to atheistic societies, like communist societies, such as North Korea. And as Christopher Hitchens famously said quite a few times, is that North Korea is the most religious state that he's ever known. And people kind of say, well, how does that make any sense? They're extremely communist, and they, you know, they reject all kinds of ideology that has to do with religion, most probably because the state wants to keep control. But the state understands that to keep control, that you have to fulfill that sense of religiosity, that sense of you know, belief and faith. You need to give that to the people, offer it to them somehow. That is how you control. And so, believe it or not, a lot of the people there believe that Kim Jong-il and also Kim Jong-un doesn't defecate. He's like a god. He doesn't have the need to defecate. And they believe all sorts of different crazy things about him as if he was a god. So that is a religion, you know. It's just the religion is the state, you know. Here's our community, here's what we do, here's our goals, you know. And they do these rituals like having military parades, you know, where they demonstrate the strength of Korea, you know. And so religiosity, you can't escape it. You can't get rid of it. You can't suppress it. But at the same time, if you have no structure for it, it can sort of take on these weird forms, and you know, it's very unsatisfying because you don't exactly know what you're doing, but you're trying to do it anyway. So I'll give you an example. This kind of would get my head on a block with certain people, but sorry to say, third wave feminism is a great example of a religion. Yoga, in a lot of circles, has become a religion. Political activism in general, you know what I mean? People who believe in recycling and saving the planet, they've turned that into a religion. And there's really not that much that I need to do to demonstrate that. I mean, if you think about female rights, for example, feminism, you have to just ask yourself something like, well, where is there true female inequality? Aside from the mantra of, you know, unequal pay and all this kind of stuff. One of the big ones is, you know, female genital mutilation, the lack of education in the Hasidic community in, say, New York, this kind of thing. And you don't really see feminists, you know, kind of attack those issues, you know, you know, and it's kind of strange because these are the, you know, girls who are educated at the level of a 14-year-old in some of these Hasidic communities, and nobody talks about it. Well, the reason for that is because feminism today is not, it's become something more of a religion, and a religion obviously needs good public relations sort of facades, right? So if they were to attack, the female inequality and the horrible things that are happening to women in those kind of sectarian societies, such as the Hasidic community, well, they would risk looking anti-Semitic, and would be a bad PR problem. And a lot of companies and businesses, they slap on that feminist logo on their windows, on their doors. There's a reason for that. It creates good business. People say, "Oh, I'm a better person for supporting this business, which fights for female equal rights." So feminism is some kind of weird structure of religion nowadays for a lot of people, and they don't really realize it, right? And they actually kind of, in a sense, go against the very values that they apparently uphold. So that's just one example of religiosity and what can happen to it if you don't have a structure for it. So yeah, you see these kind of little mini religions sort of popping up out of nowhere here and there. And that can be very confusing for someone, because they don't actually understand why even though they fulfill some kind of part of that religiosity need, like for example, transcendence. If you feel like there's community and you're part of that community by going to some kind of political rally or to a yoga studio, then that's great. But that doesn't really answer any questions of morality. It doesn't tell you whether you should talk to your sister because you guys have been in a fight for maybe a year and you haven't talked with them. That structure that you find and that you feel when you go to that yoga studio or that feminist rally or that vegan club, it won't tell you what to do with other parts of your life. And a lot of life itself needs answers to these questions. So yeah, these many religions, they just fulfill the transcendence part of things, that feeling of transcendence, by giving you community, but it doesn't fulfill answers to questions of morality all that much. So the inevitable result is depression, anxiety, confusion, mental health problems, and it's really sad, unfortunately. So what can you do about it now that you might understand it a little bit more? Because I don't just want to leave you on leave you hanging on this and just being like, whoa, unfortunately, I don't have anything that you would be really excited about to hear, because what I'm about to tell you is probably the hardest thing to do for anybody. And that really is to put yourself in a position where you may risk having an existential crisis. Or in fact, no, you will put yourself in existential crisis if you really examine the root of reality. But at least if you survive that crisis, which you will be all the better for it afterwards. Or you could keep ignoring this very real need to have structure that can allow you to express your religiosity in a proper way, and you'll be. I lost my train of thought there. I'm a little bit tired, so I'm just going to get into how you can do that. Let's see, I'm going to share your screen here. Boom. Share. Okay. So to resume what I just said, if you face the existential crisis, then you will be all the better for it. If you don't, then you'll live your entire life in this state of discontent. It's just usually how it is. Maybe I should just tag on the fact that that's my opinion. So here it is. There are two reasons for why people don't examine the nature of reality. They don't question existence and the purpose for everything. Um, if you do examine it, this is the bedrock that you arrive at, okay? And then you usually come up to this wall and you say, well, there's no need to question existence at all, because it's absurd. So here's the proposition one, and it's infinite regress. So like I had said, if you come to the idea that all there is consciousness in this universe, and everything revolves around consciousness, which is natural because you're a human being and that's what you're going to center everything around anyway. Because if you weren't conscious of yourself as an individual and of your mortality and of the future and of the past, then we wouldn't be having this discussion. So everything ultimately revolves around consciousness. Now there's two ways that you can see consciousness. One is the essentialist way, and one is the existentialist way. So an essentialist is someone who believes that the essence of reality precedes the existence of reality. And existentialism is vice versa, right? So that existence precedes essence, and that we extract the essence of the world through, our actions and what we value in terms of matter. So to give you a basic example, very basic, an existentialist would see value in humans coming together to build pieces of art and poetry and philosophical, manuscripts. And that's where the essence comes from. Whereas an essentialist would believe that there's a soul, there's a consciousness that pervades the universe. And so that's what really matters, and that, matter and existence and reality, really, it's just something that we're kind of trapped in. So there's two ways to explain that. So proposition one, infinite regress, would be here. So that's what people who usually believe in existence preceding essence. And it's that if you look at consciousness here, the observation that you would have to make to understand consciousness leads you into this paradox, which is that the observation that you would make on consciousness is made by another consciousness. So if I'm looking at a brain and I'm observing it and I break it down into all of its minute parts, just like I had mentioned in the last video, then what is looking at that consciousness is consciousness itself. And so you can never really get behind consciousness. Even if we were to have a supercomputer, or even if God itself could manifest right here, right now, and tell us, here's what consciousness is, we can never really understand it. And because we are applying our subjective view on consciousness. So it really is impossible. And also there's the other problem of asking God itself, well, what created your consciousness, right? Does that God have the ability to know? That paradox is what would turn you into an existentialist who believes in the absurdity of purpose and in the universe, because of this idea that consciousness is infinitely regressive. And that's why you see these arrows here leading back and forth all the way forever. And of course, on the other side here is people who believe in essentialism, is they believe that consciousness here in the center, it really pervades the universe. It goes beyond all space and time. It is all of space and time, but it goes beyond it. It's not something that we can comprehend in terms of matter or space-time. And so there really is no question to be asked. It just is. God is, and then there's no need to know anything. And if there is something that we need to know, well, we can know it after we die. There's something that, goes on forever after anyway. So, yeah, this is a pickle, because if all you have like choice is the absurdity of the infinite regression of consciousness, or the complete and ubiquitous sort of pervasion or of consciousness throughout the entire universe, then there's no question to be asked to begin with. So how does that lead you to living a good life? How do you choose purpose for yourself in your day-to-day, life? And how do you come to make the right decisions in the hardships that present themselves over the course of your life? These are all big problems that you can't solve just by choosing one of these systems. So what people do is, like I said, create those religious structures. They say, well, if you're an essentialist, which you believe in this consciousness that goes beyond space-time, which would be God, then we extract through the inner workings of nature. We extract these sort of God-given rules, and we say, well, here's what God wants us to do because, this is what we're observing in nature. A man and woman, that's what creates the progeniture, the children. Therefore, that must be the universal morality, and that's how we derive our morals. But if you throw religion out the window, well, there you go. You're left up to your own devices. You can choose to do what it is that you will, but we don't like choice. I mean, look, it gives you anxiety just to be on Netflix. You don't even know what to fucking watch. So how the hell are you going to be happy or healthy mentally if you have the entire realm of existence up to be defined the way you want to define it without anybody telling you what to do? That's quite a heavy load on anybody's mind. So therefore, it's clear that depression and mental health issues are going to be on the rise, right? So at the end of the day, like I said, there's no answer that can just click into your head by me telling you, oh, just do this and you'll be fine. No, what I'm telling you is you have to face one of these two models and pick either one and go with that, right? So you can either go back to religion, if you go here in the essentialist view, and say, okay, well, Islam seems to be what suits my values as far as I think, or it could be Buddhism, it could be anything. Or you could, stick with the existentialist side and derive your values from scientific rules. You can derive your values from, I guess, secularism, secular humanism, which is another structure that sort of has been erected in the last couple hundred years. So I personally am working on my own kind of philosophy. It's called paradoxism, which includes both of these models. But at the end of the day, you're personally going to have to go and face reality, right? It's literally just a big reality check. And that's really all I have to say about depression. I hope it's been enlightening and that I haven't misspoken too much. But if anybody has any questions or any comments or wants to hear me talk about something more specifically or in depth, you're welcome to reach out. All right. Have a good time. Until next time.